Dr. John Coyne, the professor for this course, and we're going to jump right into this because I want to keep these kind of short and abbreviated. So, the question I'm going to be looking at for us today is, what is normal? That's one of our discussions. We're going to be looking into this in great detail, and you're going to have discussion on it. But I want to add a different element to it for your discussions. So, the question is, what is normal? And the approach I want to take with this has to deal with humanity, because really this question is a moral question, has ethical results. Okay, so it's a moral question, and most people just look at it as a philosophical question, but it's a moral question because it is something that's going to deal with and is the basis for how we treat each other and how we treat what is normal or even abnormal, and therefore our ethics are going to be kind of based upon that morality. So what is normal? And to kind of work with this, the question I want to ask then is, what does it mean to be human? Or how do you define human? What distinctively does it mean to be human versus an animal? How do you know that you're looking at a person or a shark, for example? How do you know that you're looking at a human being or a rhinoceros? So that's kind of the question here. So what I want you to do is to kind of pause the video and answer this question. What is required to be considered human? Okay, so I want you to answer that by coming up with about 4 or 5 quick list things. So hit pause and then answer that question. You aren't hitting pause. Oh, maybe you did hit pause. We'll find out. Anyway, so hopefully you hit pause and you answered the question. Now that you've unpaused and we're watching this video again, hopefully, let's kind of look into what does it mean to be human, or how does one define a human being. And what you'll tend to notice is once you start writing out your answers and you come up with 4 or 5 or 10 or whatever items, I only asked for 4 to 5, you'll notice that usually these are able to be divided into one of 2 categories, either form or function, meaning what a human being looks like versus an animal, and how a human being behaves, or what type of functions they're able to perform that is unique to them versus an animal. And so real quick, something like this might come into play. So it might be that the form, that there's a type of form that looks humanoid, as far as being bipedal and having the type of symmetry that's within that bipedal that allows us to say, hey, that is indeed a human. And then there's, of course, if you want to get real technical, there's the opposable thumb issues, various primates and different monkeys and whatnot have a finger, but it's not an actual thumb, and so they're not able to hold a pencil or hitchhike like we're able to do. And so we have these opposable thumbs. And as far as function goes, we have complex language. In fact, really, animals don't have language at all. They're able to communicate, but there's a strong difference between communication and language. Language involves the ability to say what is not present or where not to go, where an animal is unable to say that. They're only able to say what is there, or what was there, or what they are wishing was there. And so, for example, if a bumblebee were to look for food and then they were to not find food, they would then go back to the hive and they would just be back at the hive. If, however, they found food, they would then go back to the hive and do what's called the waggle of the bee. And the waggle of the bee is a little wiggle of the rear that tells the rest of the bees that they found food. But a bee cannot communicate, don't go to Farmer Joe's house because there's no food there. Instead, go someplace else. They're not able to do that type of complex language. So animals can't communicate what is not there or where not to go. They can only say what is currently present or what is the current reality. And so that's kind of a little bit of what's going on there. So that's what I mean by complex language. Humans have a complex social contribution, like taking care of the elderly, trying to deal with stewardship versus, along with creativity of the environment, able to take sand, compress it down to make a computer chip that is able to help contribute to social environment. Very complicated way. And we have mechanics being able to be inventive and the complex development of tools. And so we can make a big long list. And this tends to be the definition of humanity from a secular humanistic point of view. It is either form and or function, usually both. You have to look like a human and act like a human. Okay. In fact, there was one professor, Dr. Joseph Fletcher, that said that if one scores 20 or below on the Binet IQ test, they are not a person. So for him, the issue was definitely there is a function element to it. But here's the problem with these definitions of humanity, and that is if a person is born deformed, let's say they're born without their thumbs, or they're born without an arm, so they're not symmetrical, are they still a human being? And we would say clearly with a resounding yes. Even if they don't look like a human, they have elephantitis syndrome, or they're having all these issues and they're deformed or whatever, we would still say they are a human. So therefore, form is not an adequate definition of humanity. So it leaves us with function. And if a person were to say be unable to have, because of low IQ, unable to have complicated language or communication skills, such as, for example, an infant, would we still consider them a human? And while Joseph Fletcher would say if they can't score, no, they're not. In fact, he actually wanted to remove children from the insurance of people, and he wanted to remove the idea of federal funding of nursing homes because he felt like they were taking care of non-humanoids. And so it was really, he was kind of a disturbing guy. But we recognized that he was disturbing. People did not like him because we know that function is not a definition of humanity either. That if you can't function like a human, we still recognize you are still indeed a human. And so we would then say, like, for the example, those that are severely mentally brain damaged and they never have a IQ or a mental understanding beyond the age of 2, we still recognize that despite those limitations and disabilities in function, that they're still a human being. And so form nor function are a proper definition of humanity. And this is what abnormal tends to be based upon, an abnormal form or abnormal function. And neither one is really a definition of humanity, let alone normality like that. And so it becomes a real complicated issue. So then that leaves us with the last element of what it means to be human, and that is human by essence. And scientists and theologians describe the same thing in different ways. Usually something like this, our DNA, or the image of God. And so theologians say we're created in the image of God. And then, scientists tend to say that it's our DNA, but it's our essence. We are in essence human. Now, with this in mind, then, this allows us, here's some major implications of this then, this allows us to really have a different conversation should we ever talk with someone about, let's say, abortion. Because when you look at an egg that is fertilized, usually people start arguing, is it alive? Is it not alive? Is it alive? Is it not alive? There's a heartbeat at a certain age and so many weeks. Does that count? And people fight back and forth. But let's change that discussion 100%. Let's look at it from a different point of view. You had a fertilized egg. That fertilized egg automatically has 100% the DNA necessary to grow into an adult human. No DNA is added. It's just more of the same DNA code. But it is 100% the DNA there for a human being. That's why a fertilized egg never grows up to become a alligator, and that would be weird to give birth to as a human anyways. But no fertilized human egg ever grows up to be some crossbreed of something with like a snake or a dolphin. Okay, always a human gives birth to a human. Okay, so though the fertilized egg does not have the form of a human, it does not have the function of a human, it does have the very essence of a human. So therefore, we ought to re-ask the question, rather than life or not life, how should we treat a human being? Okay, and so this is part of the implications of this whole issue of what does it mean to be human and what does it mean to be a normal human. And there was one Dr. Eric Maisel that said this: it can't be and must not be normal to own slaves just because all the landowners in your state own slaves. Normal cannot mean what, and must not mean what we see all the time or what we see the most of. Okay, and so he is beginning to recognize, and several other secular psychiatrists and psychologists are beginning to recognize that normal, meaning the average or the norm or the above 50%, can't be the definition of normal, because otherwise you start having moral and ethical implications in very scary directions on how you treat those minorities at that point. So that then brings us right back to understanding that how we define normal is a moral question with ethical results. Because how we answer this could end up and does end up very strongly influencing how we're going to treat someone, how we're going to handle them. Are we going to view them as human or not human? Because a lot of times normal tends to be about form and function. And then when they are abnormal on that, we tend to look upon them with fear, with disgust, with any type of that type of inappropriate behavior. So this is our question. What does it mean to be normal? And hopefully now, as you continue with the discussion in the class, you might be able to have some of this just feeding in a little bit as we begin to reflect upon this very serious question. What does it mean to be normal?